So I told him, you can take the horse, but you can't have the turquoise. I mean, seriously, who did he think he was?
Yeah. The punch came fast, not reckless trained. A right cross with full hip rotation behind it, launched from a southpaw stance, aimed precisely at the center of Daniel Ward's face, the kind of punch that, if it landed, would drop most men. It did not land. Daniel moved exactly one step to the left, not backward, not in panic. One step, efficient and unhurried, the way a man sidesteps a puddle he has stepped around 1,000 times before. The fist carved through cold December air and found nothing. Tyler Kane, 23 years old, third-degree black belt, regional champion 3 years running, stumbled forward with the momentum of a strike that had connected with no resistance whatsoever. The gym went silent. 30 people watched, parents in folding chairs, teenage students along the far wall, Coach Miriam Nakamura standing at the edge of the mat with her arms crossed and her expression carefully unreadable. Nobody laughed, because the man in the worn work jacket, the man who had been sitting quietly in the back row for 40 minutes, drinking gas station coffee and watching the advanced class, had not tried to impress anyone. He had simply not been where the punch expected him to be. And that, everyone in the room understood instinctively, was an entirely different thing. Denver, in December, had a particular quality of cold, not vicious, but settled, the kind that had made itself at home. Snow had fallen overnight and now lay packed and gray along the curbs of South Colorado Boulevard. The sky was the color of old concrete. Daniel Ward had been awake since 5, not by alarm. He hadn't used an alarm clock in 11 years. His body had been recalibrated somewhere in the mountains of Kunar Province and had never entirely recalibrated back. 5 a.m., regardless of season, regardless of circumstance. Eyes open, inventory of the room. Assessment complete in under 4 seconds. Then, coffee, whatever job site he was expected at, and the particular series of tasks that made up a life. Today was Saturday, so there was no job site. Today was Leo's class. He had arrived at Northridge Combat Academy 17 minutes early, which was how he arrived everywhere. Leo had gone into the children's beginner class at 9 sharp, a small serious boy in a white gi that was still slightly too large in the shoulders, carrying his belt in one hand because he hadn't quite mastered the knot. Daniel had helped him with it in the parking lot. His hands, large and scarred at the knuckles, had tied the bow with a precision that surprised Leo every time. "You're really good at knots, Dad," Leo had said. "I've had practice," Daniel said. He didn't explain. He rarely did. Now he sat in the second row of folding chairs along the east wall, coffee cup balanced on one knee, watching through the interior window as his son practiced his stance under the guidance of a young instructor named Brett. Leo was improving. His footwork was still tentative, his guard inconsistent, but something in his eyes had sharpened over the past 2 months. He was beginning to understand that the point was not to be impressive. The point was to be correct. Daniel watched everything. The room itself, 2 exits, 1 camera mounted in the northeast corner with a slight downward angle, a fire extinguisher near the water fountain. The other parents, a mother on her phone, a father reading something on a tablet, a grandfather who had fallen half asleep in the corner chair. The mat, a proper 40 by 40 training space, quality flooring, well maintained. He noted these things without effort or intention. It was simply how he processed space. The children's class ended at 9:45. Leo collected his water bottle and waved at Daniel through the glass, a small, proud wave before going to change his shoes. The adult advanced class would begin in 15 minutes. Daniel stayed. He wasn't sure, later, why he stayed. He had nowhere else to be until noon, and he found, increasingly, that watching other people train was one of the few things that quieted the low-frequency static that lived at the back of his skull. The focus required to observe technique, to read movement, to track what was efficient and what was wasted, occupied exactly the part of his brain that otherwise had nothing useful to do. He refilled his coffee from the small machine by the front desk. He sat back down. The injury had happened 14 months ago. Not an accident in the way the word usually implies. The IED that had ended his last contract had been anticipated as a category of event, if not in its specific timing or location. He had walked away with his hearing intact and a rebuilt left shoulder and a right hand that now worked at about 70% of what it had once done. The VA had a word for the rest of what he carried. Several words, in fact, arranged into a clinical abbreviation that he had never found fully satisfying as a description of the actual experience. The approximation was close enough. There were nights that were difficult and weeks that were harder than the nights, and then there were mornings, like this one: warm room, bad coffee, his son learning to plant his feet, and those mornings balanced something that resisted more precise description. He had gotten Leo into the classes because Leo had asked. That was how Daniel tried to make decisions about his son, following what the boy reached toward, rather than projecting a future onto him. Leo had watched a demonstration at a local community center 6 months ago and come home and said, with his characteristic seriousness, that he wanted to learn that. Daniel had enrolled him the following week. It cost more than the budget easily allowed. He had adjusted other things without mentioning it. He had not told anyone at the gym anything about himself. This was not concealment. It was the habit of a man who had learned that information was a resource, and offering it indiscriminately was wasteful, and that most of what people needed to know about you they could determine from watching how you moved and what you paid attention to. Most people, in his experience, did not watch carefully enough to learn much at all. That was fine. It made the world quieter. Tyler Kane entered from the locker room at 3 minutes past 10, which was notable because the class began at 10 and he was never on time by accident. He was the kind of person for whom lateness was a communication strategy. He was a good-looking young man in the way of someone who knew it, broad-shouldered, lean, his dark hair still damp from a morning shower. He wore training gear that was current and expensive. He carried himself with the particular ease of someone who had been told he was exceptional, often enough to have simply started believing it without the supporting evidence of hardship. He was also, Daniel observed, a genuinely talented martial artist. That was the complicated thing. Tyler Kane's technique was real. His combinations were sharp, his footwork practiced, his reaction time better than most people his age. He had earned his rank honestly, as far as Daniel could assess. The problem was not that he was undeserving. The problem was that he had confused technical achievement with understanding. The advanced class gathered 9 students, ranging from late teens to early 40s. Coach Nakamura, a compact woman in her early 50s with close-cropped gray hair and a deliberate, economical way of moving, led the warm-up. She had been running this gym for 16 years. She had a regional reputation and a quietly devastating ground game, and she did not permit ego on her mat as a rule. Tyler, to his credit, did not openly defy her. He was simply always slightly more visible than the others, working harder when she was watching, adding small flourishes to his combinations, positioning himself where he could be seen. He was performing competence rather than practicing it. Daniel watched all of this without expression from his folding chair. He had known people like Tyler Kane. Not this exact person, the specific configuration of talent and ego and youth was always its own thing, but the type, talented enough to have always found the ceiling of their environment before the environment found them. The danger of that kind of trajectory was not that you became arrogant, exactly. It was that you began to confuse the ceiling of your environment for the ceiling of the discipline. You stopped expecting to be surprised. Coach Nakamura moved the class into sparring drills. Pairs, cycling, 2-minute rounds, focus on combination defense. Daniel set his coffee down on the empty chair beside him. He watched Tyler's left hand. Specifically, Tyler carried his left guard approximately 2 centimeters higher than optimal when he was generating power on the right. It was a minor tell, the kind of thing that a competent opponent with real experience would identify and exploit within 40 seconds. In a controlled gym setting against partners who were used to him, it didn't matter. But it would matter when it mattered. He said nothing for several minutes. It wasn't his gym, wasn't his class, wasn't his business. But then one of the younger students, a teenager named Marcus, 17, clearly earnest, kept getting his grip broken during a clinch drill. The same way, 3 times in succession. He was placing his thumb outside the natural line of force. It was going to hurt him eventually. Daniel, almost involuntarily, spoke. His left thumb, he said quietly, to no one in particular. Wrong angle on the grip. Coach Nakamura glanced at him. Then, at Marcus. She adjusted the boy's hand position herself. Marcus ran the drill again. The grip held. She looked back at Daniel for a moment, then returned to the class without comment. There was a steadiness in her attention when she looked at him that he recognized. She was a woman who was very good at reading people, and she was reading him. Tyler, from across the mat, had noticed the exchange. It happened again 12 minutes later. The class was working a takedown defense sequence, and Tyler was demonstrating. He was technically correct in the setup proper posture, good base, textbook positioning, but his entry angle was 15 degrees off for the room spacing. Which meant that in the version he was demonstrating, his training partner would consistently have an easier counter than intended. Daniel said nothing the first time. He said nothing the second time either. On the third repetition, when 2 students were clearly confused about why the counter wasn't working the way it was supposed to, Daniel said, quietly, to the man in the chair beside him, Frank Dalton, 61 years old, retired, whose grandson was in Leo's class. The angle. He's demonstrating for center mat, but they're working at the edge. Frank glanced at him. Then, at the mat. He didn't say anything. But something shifted in the way he was looking at Daniel. Coach Nakamura, who had ears like a person who had spent decades on mats where the difference between hearing and not hearing could mean injury, turned slightly. "Can you show me what you mean?" she said. Not challenging. Not welcoming either. Simply direct. Daniel looked at her for a moment. "Sorry," he said. "Not my place." "I'm asking," she said. He stood, set his coffee down, walked to the edge of the mat, not on it, just to the edge, and indicated, briefly, with a gesture, the spatial relationship between the wall and the training pair. He explained it in 2 sentences. Coach Nakamura turned to Tyler. Tyler looked at the space, looked at the wall. Reset the demonstration 4 feet toward center. The partners ran it again. The counter worked. "Thank you," Coach Nakamura said, and returned to the class. Daniel returned to his chair. Tyler watched him go. There was something specific in his expression, not quite anger, not quite embarrassment, but the precise cocktail of both that a person feels when someone more knowledgeable has quietly corrected them in front of an audience. He filed it. He let the class continue. For the moment, the break came at 10:50. Students moved to water bottles, to the edges of the mat, to the bench along the south wall. Tyler toweled off his face and walked across the gym with the particular unhurried purpose of someone who has decided something. He stopped in front of Daniel's row of chairs. "You train?" he said. The question was phrased casually, but there was nothing casual about the intent behind it. Daniel recognized the framing immediately. It was a challenge dressed as curiosity. "Little bit," Daniel said. He didn't look up from his coffee immediately. When he did, his expression was mild. "Where?" Tyler said. "Different places." Tyler tilted his head slightly. "That's not an answer. It's the answer I have," Daniel said. Around them, the room had become somewhat quieter. A few students were watching without appearing to watch. Frank Dalton had stopped checking his phone. "So, what are you?" Tyler said. "Some kind of expert?" There was a particular edge to the word expert, the way someone uses a word to diminish whatever it describes. "No," Daniel said. "But you've got all these observations." I watch carefully. A pause. It's a habit. Tyler was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular brand of confidence that doesn't realize it's overextending. You want to come up? 1 round. Show me what watching carefully looks like. A few students were definitely looking now. Daniel was quiet for 4 seconds, not hesitating, considering. There was a difference, though from the outside it might have looked the same. He thought about what the 3 minutes on the mat would cost. Not physically, that wasn't the concern. He was thinking about what it meant to demonstrate something in a room full of people who were learning. What Tyler got from the exchange mattered. What the students watching took from it mattered. He had been in enough training environments to know that the memory of a moment on a mat could shape a person's understanding for years. He was not going to hurt this kid. He was not going to humiliate him. He was going to show him the edge of what he knew, as cleanly as possible, without commentary. That was the calculation. It took 4 seconds. He looked at Leo's jacket hanging on the hook by the door. Then back at Tyler. You sure? He said. Absolutely, Tyler said. Daniel put his coffee down on the empty chair beside him. He folded the cardboard sleeve over the lip, holding it in place. A small, careful gesture. All right, he said. He pulled off his boots, worn steel-toed construction boots. The leather cracked at the toe boxes, the laces replaced twice. He set them neatly beside the chair. He stepped onto the mat in gray wool socks. The room changed the moment he stepped on, not because he did anything to change it, because the way he moved across that transition from floor to mat was different from the way Tyler moved across it, different from the way anyone in that room moved across it, except possibly Coach Nakamura and possibly Frank Dalton in some residual, professional way. It was the movement of someone for whom the terrain underfoot was always information, who always knew, on some level, what the ground would do. No warm-up, no stretching. He simply stood. What Daniel did not do was as instructive as anything he did. He did not roll his shoulders. He did not bounce on his heels or shake out his hands. He did not adopt a stance to signal competence. He simply stood in the center of the mat with his hands at his sides, his weight distributed evenly, and looked at Tyler with the patient attention of someone waiting for a bus that always arrives on schedule. The other students had gathered instinctively. Not dramatically, they weren't rushing, but quietly, finding their way to the edges of the mat and the spaces along the wall. The room had reorganized itself around what was about to happen. Frank Dalton had set his phone in his jacket pocket. Coach Nakamura stood at the corner of the mat with her arms crossed. Her expression hadn't changed, but she had not intervened, which in Daniel's assessment meant she was curious. Tyler raised his guard. Orthodox, professional form, automatic, and ingrained. He circled once to the left. Daniel tracked the circle without moving his feet. Just his eyes, steady and interested. Tyler feinted with the jab. Daniel didn't react. Tyler tried it again, shorter. Still nothing. A muscle jumped in Tyler's jaw. He came in, but before he did, there was a single second where nothing moved. The room had achieved a specific quality of silence that Daniel recognized from other contexts. The silence of people who have suddenly understood that they are watching something real. The casual spectators had stopped being casual. The students along the wall had stopped their conversations. Even the mother who had been on her phone had set it down on the chair beside her without seeming to notice she'd done it. Frank Dalton had put both feet flat on the floor. Coach Nakamura had not moved, but her weight had shifted almost imperceptibly forward, the way a person's weight shifts when they stop observing and start attending. Tyler read the room. He was intelligent enough for that, and what he saw, if he looked carefully, was that the room was not watching him the way it usually watched him. It was watching the man on the other side of the mat. The man who had not bothered to find a stance. The man who was simply standing there in gray socks on a martial arts mat in a North Denver gym at 10:50 on a December morning, looking at Tyler Kane the way you look at something you've already understood. He came in. The right cross came with genuine speed and genuine power. A strike that would have impressed anyone watching, because it was impressive. Correct mechanics, full commitment, clean line. Daniel was not where it was aimed. He hadn't blocked, hadn't parried. He had simply vacated the space the punch required. One small lateral step, and the strike passed through air that had already been abandoned. He was now at Tyler's 3 o'clock, half a step inside the extended arm, and he put his right hand on Tyler's shoulder, not striking, just placing and redirected the momentum that remained. Tyler stumbled a step forward. Nothing theatrical. No grunt of effort, no flourish. It was precisely as large as it needed to be, and no larger. Tyler reset. His expression had changed. The easy confidence had been replaced with something focused and concentrated, which was actually a better version of him. He came in again, combination this time. Jab, cross, left hook to the body. Fast, practiced, genuinely threatening. Daniel moved backward and to the right on the jab, slipping inside the cross, and caught the body hook on his forearm. He redirected Tyler's elbow upward with his left hand, creating a momentary gap in the guard, stepped through it, and wrapped Tyler's right wrist in a grip that stopped the next intended strike before it began. He held it for 1 second. Not tightening, just holding. "Weights on your front foot," Daniel said, quietly enough that only Tyler could hear. "You can't generate the left hook from that position." He released the grip. Tyler stepped back. His breathing had picked up not from exertion, but from something closer to recalibration. He looked at Daniel with new eyes. The old framework for understanding who this man was had stopped working, and he was in the process of building a new one. He shot for the takedown. It was a good shot, double leg, low, committed. Tyler had a strong wrestling background, and the setup was clean. Against most opponents, it would have worked. Daniel sprawled, but not with the panicked urgency of someone reacting. He had seen it coming 2 beats before it arrived. He read it in Tyler's knee drop and the shift of his hips. His sprawl was preemptive rather than reactive. His hips behind and his weight distributed across Tyler's upper back, and he guided the momentum in a circle rather than fighting it directly. Tyler ended up on his hands and knees. Daniel stepped back immediately. No mount, no submission, no press to advantage. He simply gave the space back. "Okay," he said. The room was absolutely still. One of the teenage students, a girl named Cassidy who was 16 and had been training for 4 years, said in a whisper that was not quite quiet enough, "He's not striking at anything. He's just moving into the wrong spots," which was an accurate description, and she would remember having understood it correctly when she was older and had a better vocabulary for what she'd seen. Coach Nakamura uncrossed her arms. Tyler stood on the mat after the 3rd exchange and did not immediately reset for another. He was standing with his hands at his sides, his guard down, which was the body language not of surrender but of someone who has decided to stop doing the thing that isn't working and think instead, which was, in Daniel's assessment, the correct response. "Okay," Tyler said. He said it quietly, and it was not directed at Daniel. It was the word a person uses when they are updating a model. "Okay." Daniel waited. "You could have hit me," Tyler said. A statement, not a question, multiple times. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Why didn't you?" Daniel considered this. "Because the point wasn't to hit you," he said. "The point was to find out what you had." Tyler looked at him. "And you've got real technique," Daniel said. It was not a compliment in the way Tyler was used to compliments, not inflated or celebratory. It was a field assessment, accurate and without decoration. "Your fundamentals are solid. Your combinations are sharp. Your reaction time is good." He paused. "You've just never been in a situation where none of that was enough." The room was still quiet. Cassidy, the 16-year-old along the wall, had her arms wrapped around herself in the unconscious posture of someone watching something they know they'll remember. Tyler turned and walked to the edge of the mat. He sat down. He pulled his knees up and looked at the floor for a moment. "Thank you," he said, finally, for not making it worse than it needed to be. Daniel nodded once. He stepped off the mat. Daniel stepped off the mat and returned to his chair. He picked up his coffee. It was still warm. The room did not immediately fill with conversation the way rooms usually do when something notable has ended. People remained in their positions for several seconds, the way an audience stays seated after unexpected music has stopped, uncertain whether it is truly finished. Tyler stood on the mat. He was looking at his own hands as though reacquainting himself with their capabilities and limitations. He was doing the uncomfortable arithmetic of someone who has just discovered that the map they've been using is missing significant terrain. Frank Dalton moved his folding chair 2 feet to the left so that he could speak to Daniel without turning. "Army?" he said. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Long?" Frank said, 8 years. A pause. Then some contracts after. Frank nodded slowly. He was a man who understood that contracts after meant something specific in the context of someone who fought the way Daniel fought. "What branch?" Frank said. Daniel told him. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I did 25 with Denver PD. Retired 2 years ago." He let that sit for a second. "I've been watching you since you walked in." "I know," Daniel said. Frank looked at him. "You were checking the exits too," Daniel said. Not unkindly, just factually. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he made a short sound that was not quite a laugh. "Fair enough," he said. They sat with it for a moment, the comfortable quiet of two men who have both spent long professional years practicing situational awareness and no longer needed to explain to each other why the habit persists after the career is over. 25 years, Frank said. "You'd think I'd have learned to leave the exits alone. I don't think it goes away," Daniel said. "No." Frank glanced at Daniel's right hand, resting on his knee. The imprecision in the way the fingers rested slight, but structural. The kind of thing a trained eye recognized as rebuilt rather than restored. "Your hand," he said. Daniel turned it briefly. "Yeah." Frank nodded. He did not ask anything further. He was a man who knew what it meant when a person turned their hand briefly and said, "Yeah," without elaboration. "You looked pretty good for a man sitting in a folding chair," Frank said finally. "Different context," Daniel said. "Today was safe. I don't have to be fast anymore. Just right." Coach Nakamura came to stand near the edge of the seating area. She didn't sit. She looked at Daniel with the direct, undecorated attention of someone who does not waste her looking. "That's not cardio kickboxing," she said. "No," Daniel agreed. She nodded. "Thank you for what you showed them, even if you didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to," Daniel said. "But I don't mind." She returned to her students. The class resumed, quieter and somehow more serious. Leo came out of the changing room at 11:15, his gi folded under one arm and his sneakers on the wrong feet. Daniel crouched down without comment and swapped them. Leo submitted to this with the patience of someone used to being corrected about shoes. "How was class?" Daniel said. Brett said, "My stance is getting better," Leo said. He considered this. He said, "I look like I'm starting to mean it." "That's a good thing to mean," Daniel said. "Were you watching?" "The whole time," Daniel said. Leo accepted this. It was the expected answer, the only answer he had ever received to that question, and he found it grounding in the way that a child finds reliable things grounding. They walked toward the exit together. At the door, Frank Dalton was gathering his grandson's bag. He and Daniel exchanged a brief nod, the particular nod of men who have covered meaningful ground together without discussing it. In the parking lot, the snow had started again. Fine and indifferent. Daniel strapped Leo into the back seat of the truck, a 2009 F-150 with high mileage and a driver's door that required a specific trick to open from the inside. He started the engine and let it warm for a minute. "Dad," Leo said, from the back. "Yeah, that guy at the gym today. The one with the ponytail. What about him? Someone at the water fountain said you made him look dumb." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "He's not dumb," Daniel said. "He's good. He just hasn't been in a situation where he had to find out what he doesn't know yet. Leo processed this with the serious face he used for information that required filing. Did you used to be in situations like that? Leo said. Yeah, Daniel said. A lot of them. Were you scared? Daniel looked at his son in the rearview mirror. The small, serious face, the gap in his front teeth, the overlarge jacket, the thing he had come home for. Sometimes, Daniel said. The trick is to have done enough work beforehand that scared doesn't get in the way. Leo nodded as though this was a satisfying answer. It was. Daniel pulled out of the parking lot. The snow fell on the truck and on the road and on the gray city, and he drove his son home. The route back took them down Alameda, past the hardware store where he sometimes picked up supplies for weekend jobs, past the library where Leo had checked out the same book about deep-sea creatures 3 times now. The city looked soft under the snow, the edges of things blurred and forgiving, and Daniel drove through it with both hands on the wheel and the heater running. He thought about Tyler Kane. Not with any particular feeling toward him, not satisfaction, not pity, more with the recognition of someone who had encountered the same shape of experience in himself at a different time. The moment you discover that your confidence was built on a foundation that hasn't been tested in the ways that matter, that discovery could resolve in a number of directions. Some people sealed the crack and resumed as before. Some came apart. Some, the ones worth watching, used it. Tyler had the bearing of someone who would use it. Daniel had a reasonable eye for that kind of thing. "Can we get soup?" Leo said from the back seat. He said it the same way he said most things, not demanding, just informing Daniel of a preference, the way someone places an order with confidence in the kitchen. "Sure," Daniel said. "Chicken place or noodle place?" Leo considered this with genuine seriousness. "Noodle place," he decided finally, "but the chicken soup. Not the pork one." "Noted," Daniel said. Leo settled back and looked out the window at the snow. He made no demands on the silence for the rest of the drive, which was one of the things about him that Daniel found most remarkable. Leo had somehow absorbed the understanding that not every moment needed filling. Daniel did not know how the boy had learned this. He suspected Leo had simply been born with it, some quiet inheritance, arrived at from an unknown direction. The following Saturday, Tyler Kane arrived at North Ridge at 8:50, 10 minutes before the gym opened. He sat on the front step in the cold and waited. He had spent the week replaying the 3 minutes on the mat, not with humiliation that had faded fairly quickly, because he was honest enough with himself to know that humiliation was only useful if it taught you something. He'd replayed it analytically, trying to identify the seams where his training had failed to account for what Daniel had done. What he kept arriving at was a structural problem, not a technical one. He had been training in conditions that were too controlled. He'd optimized for gym sparring, for partners who were used to him, for formats where he already understood the parameters. What Daniel had shown him, without trying to show him anything, was that there was a whole register of experience he hadn't been exposed to. He had called his uncle in Colorado Springs, who had 20 years in Army combat training, and now ran a small defensive tactics program for law enforcement. They'd talked for an hour. His uncle had said, "You just found out there's a ceiling to what competition training teaches you. That's not a failure. That's information." Tyler had been thinking about that. When Daniel arrived at 9:05 with Leo, Tyler stood up from the front step. Leo went directly to the door. He had been here enough times that the geography was familiar. Daniel watched his son go in, then turned. Tyler said, "I owe you an apology." Daniel waited. "The way I came at you was disrespectful. I was doing something performative, and I called it a challenge." He stopped. That was wrong. Daniel studied him for a moment. The cold air moved between them. "It's forgotten," Daniel said. "I'm not looking for you to forget it," Tyler said. "I'm looking to own it." There was something in that response that Daniel hadn't expected. He looked at the young man with more attention than before. "All right," Daniel said. Tyler nodded. Then, "The thing you said." About my front foot. He looked at Daniel directly. Can you show me what you meant? I've been trying to work it out and I can't isolate it. Daniel was quiet for a moment. In that moment, he weighed something the habit of not offering, the practice of keeping himself separate, the whole architecture of not getting involved. Buy Leo a hot chocolate after class, Daniel said. He'll want the one with the little marshmallows, and I'll show you the weight distribution. Tyler blinked. That's the condition? It's not a condition. It's just how that'll go. Tyler almost smiled. Okay, he said. They went inside. The gym was already warm, the smell of cleaning solution and old mat, and the particular locker room adjacent air of a working training facility. Coach Nakamura was pulling pads from the storage rack, setting up for the morning session. She glanced at Daniel when he came through the door, then at Tyler behind him. Her expression performed the small, economical calculation of someone who has watched 16 years of interpersonal developments play out in her gym and has learned to register them without commentary. She gave Daniel a brief nod. He returned it. Leo, oblivious to all of this, went directly to the changing room to get into his gi. He moved through the gym with the comfortable authority of someone who has been coming to a place long enough to understand its specific geography. He knew which hook was for his bag and which water fountain had better pressure, and that the mat on the far left had a soft corner that you had to account for when working near the edge. 8 years old. Already had a relationship with this room. Daniel stood just inside the door for a moment. Then he walked to the folding chairs and sat down. No coffee this morning. He had a sense the session would go differently today. He was right. After the children's class, after Tyler's session with Coach Nakamura's group, they stood at the edge of the mat. Daniel walked Tyler through the weight distribution 3 times. He didn't use many words. He used his hands to indicate position, to provide feedback on balance points, to correct the angle of Tyler's rear heel. Tyler ran it alone, then with a partner. It wasn't a revelation, the mechanics were subtle, but he could feel the difference in his hip rotation. A small thing, an important thing. I've been making that mistake for 4 years, Tyler said. Probably not every time, Daniel said. Just when you're going for power, it's a power generation habit. How did you see it in 5 minutes? Daniel considered the question. I've watched a lot of people move, he said, in a lot of different contexts. He didn't elaborate. Tyler didn't push. Coach Nakamura, passing by with a stack of training pads, paused. She looked at the two of them, the young champion and the man in the work jacket, and something in her expression was quietly satisfied. She moved on without comment, which was its own form of approval. Leo came out of the changing room with his gi under one arm and a hot chocolate in both hands, navigating the cup with serious concentration to avoid spilling it. Tyler crouched down to his level. "You're Leo?" he said. Leo looked at him carefully. "Yeah, your dad's been teaching me something today." Leo considered Tyler with the frank assessment of a child who has not yet learned to soften his evaluation of people. "He's good at that," Leo said. "Yeah," Tyler said. He stood up and offered Daniel his hand. Daniel shook it a brief, direct grip. "Thank you," Tyler said. "Work on the heel," Daniel said. Tyler almost laughed. "Right," he said. "The heel." He gathered his gear and left. Frank Dalton, passing on his way out with his grandson, paused near Daniel. "Good thing you did there," Frank said. Daniel watched Tyler push through the front door into the snow. "He'll be fine," Daniel said. "He's got the right instincts. He just needed to know there was more to learn." Frank nodded. "Same goes for most of us." He left. Coach Nakamura appeared at Daniel's elbow. She stood beside him for a moment. Both of them looking at the gym, the teenagers rolling on the far mat, the new parents in the chairs, the cold light coming through the frosted front windows. "You know," she said, "I've been running this gym for 16 years. I've had a lot of people sit in those chairs." "I know," Daniel said. "I've never had anyone correct my class from a folding chair and then get up and do that." "Sorry about the class," Daniel said. "Don't be." She paused. Leo's improving fast. He's got a good foundation. Daniel looked at his son, who was attempting to whistle and manage the hot chocolate simultaneously. He works at it, Daniel said. So do you, she said. And then, as though it cost her something to say it, we have an open teaching slot Thursday evenings, nothing formal, just additional technical instruction for the intermediate group. She looked at him carefully, something to consider. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He watched Leo try the whistle again. Fail, take a sip of hot chocolate instead, with the philosophical acceptance of someone who has identified a better option. I'll think about it, Daniel said. It was not a yes, but it was not the no it would have been 2 hours ago. Outside, the snow was still falling fine and patient, the way snow falls when it has nowhere else to be. The city was quieter than it usually was on Saturday afternoons, muffled by the white. Through the frosted glass of the front windows, it looked almost soft. Inside Northridge Combat Academy, a boy of 8 was learning that standing correctly was the foundation of everything. A young champion was walking out with a small correction that would change his entire power structure. A retired cop had already texted his wife that he'd seen something interesting today. And a man who had spent 8 years learning to survive in places where the ground itself could not be trusted was sitting in a folding chair in a warm gym, drinking mediocre coffee, watching his son try to whistle. He was not, at this exact moment, surviving. He was, at this exact moment, here. It had taken him longer to arrive here than it should have. The first year after discharge had been constructed almost entirely of motion contracts. Work. Jobs that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied with specific, manageable problems. He had used productivity as a form of anesthesia, which worked reasonably well as a strategy until it stopped working, which it always did eventually. The therapist at the VA, a dry-humored woman named Dr. Patricia Weller, who wore the same 3 cardigan colors in rotation and asked questions that seemed simple until you were in the middle of answering them, had told him that the work was not the problem. The work was fine. The problem was using the work as a substitute for presence. There is a difference, she had said, between being occupied and being here. You can be the most occupied person in a room and not be there at all. He had found this observation irritating, which she had told him meant it was accurate. Leo had been the one who finally pulled him through the membrane. Not through anything dramatic, not through a crisis or a revelation or a scene that would work well in a story, just through the ordinary continuous fact of needing things. Lunch, a shoe tied, a question about deep-sea fish answered, a permission slip signed, the small, relentless gravity of a child who needs you specifically, you in particular, present and accounted for. He had come to understand that this was not a burden. It was, in the particular accounting of his life, the thing that had saved it. That was the thing about peace. It did not arrive loudly. It came in small Saturday mornings, in steel-toed boots left neatly by a mat, in a child's hot chocolate, and the particular quiet of a room where everyone was learning something they had not known before. Daniel Ward finished his coffee. He stood. He tied Leo's left shoe, which had come undone again. They walked out together into the snow.